Okay, so for my biology project for the lab, I decided to do a lab that helps shows the transfer of energy throughout an ecosystem. So this is me prepping for it and getting ready for the actual lab portion. So basically how this lab works is that you have the four main tertiary parts of the ecosystem. There is a fifth level consumer and a fourth level consumer, but for the sake of simplicity and how complicated the lab already is, we're just going to do the first four. So we have the tertiary consumer as a hog. We have the mouse as the primary consumer, the grass as the producer, and the snake as the secondary consumer. And each of these, to represent the energy that the animal has, each of them have 10 beads in the cup. It doesn't really matter the color of the beads. And then here is our supply, and then here is our loss bin. Okay, so as you can see here, as I stated earlier, there are only 4 cups, but if you had 24 students in your class, you would have 6 students per each section, and you don't have to use the hawk, mouse, snake, and grass ecosystem. You could use an oceans ecosystem, you could use a desert ecosystem, just as long as there's only the 4 tropic levels. You could add the 5th and 6th tropic levels in, but since the lab is already complicated enough, I just wanted to keep it simple with only the 4 main tropic levels. On the doc, I've already inserted a table, and it explains when one organism eats another, the organism that is eating the other takes 5 beads and puts it in their Dixie cup, and each organism puts 2 beads into the losses bin. And basically, what the loss bin represents is it represents the energy that the organisms rather poop out or their bodies don't absorb and they just burn off completely. So that loss bin helps students see what their organisms lose. And then it also shows how the people on the top of the food chain have to eat more food to get more energy. And then if an organism loses all of their beads, that's the equivalent to an organism dying. So that's why an organism would just exit the game, because it's technically dead. Neither organism can eat each other, so each organism puts 1 bead in the losses container, because in the wild, if 2 animals can't eat each other, they still have to exert energy. So just for the sake of participation, they'd still put 1 bead in the losses container. And then if producers interact, they remove 5 beads from the supply bin and put 1 in the losses container. So they would gain that energy from each other, because they're producers, they can't consume each other. They would just get their energy from the sun, but they'd still lose a little bit of energy. So students will be expected to carry around their lab sheet while they're doing this, so they can see how the organisms line up with each other. So basically, for my example, I'm going to have the hawk interact with the mouse. So you can see on the cups it says hawk and mouse. So if I look at my sheet, I can see that the hawk is going to eat the mouse. So what the mouse would do is they would take 5 beads out of their cup. So 5 beads out of their cup, but the hawk would lose 2 beads. So you'd come over here, and in your classroom you would have a bin labeled for loss and a bin labeled for supply. So this is the bin for loss. So the hawk, whatever student has the hawk, would have to take their 2 beads out and put it in. So now the mouse only has 6 beads left, and the hawk now has 13 beads. So you just continue this, having each of the students who represent different organisms in the ecosystem interact with each other and see who loses beads, who gains beads, and have students kind of think about how many beads go into the lost pile of energy that the animals would otherwise lose in the wild. Once a student loses all of their beads, then they're out of the game, and you see who's the last one standing. It should be someone on the top of the food chain, the tertiary consumer, the hawk, or your students ended up making a mistake. So depending on the class size, you would want to have 4 separate groups as the cups are, but depending on your class, you would just split your class into 4 groups. So whether you have 4 mice, 4 hawks, 4 whatever, you just need to split them into the 4 separate groups. And what I will demonstrate is what it looks like when they interact.